Well, whoever it was told me that it would be pretty difficult to separate the last battle chapter from the rest of the book in Memory of Light was absolutely correct. Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and we're covering the end of the final book of the Wheel of Time, the end of the series proper entire, which is a really surreal thing to be saying. You know, I was thinking that this diary would be chapter 37 or the last battle all by itself, because that chapter is 190 pages, and like that's, you know, pretty much up there with the max amount of pages I want to be covering in any given week in these diaries for time-related reasons. Yeah, like I said, just to start off the video, whoever told me it would be hard to separate that chapter from the last 100 pages was correct, because the last 100 pages is, well, still the last battle. It makes enough sense when you read it why the last 100 pages are actually split up between their like 11 or 12 chapters or something like that, plus the epilogue, and the last battle is the one chapter that it is. It actually does make proper structural sense in several respects, and for my general impressions of the end of the book is the end of this book is really crazy, really bonkers for sure. I spent around 10 hours reading this diary's worth of material, and not only did I do those 10 hours, you might notice if you watched last week's diary that this video is probably a little bit different structurally than you were thinking it was going to be, because I had anticipated that I would probably read the last battle over 3 or 4 days because of certain obligatory reasons. Obligatory, I guess, is the proper pronunciation of that word. And then I would read the last 100 pages whenever I had time for it, because I didn't think that I would have the ability to get to it before I had to take a business trip over, you know, the following weekend while I was working on the book. But that's not what ended up happening, just like I thought I would not be able to, but like what I really wanted to be able to do over the last 3 years reading the series. I read all of the last battle in one day, so all 7 hours that it took me to read that chapter, I didn't just read in one day, mind you, I read that in one sitting, so I actually managed to do that thing that I wanted to do, and it was an experience. And more than that, I read the next 3 hours, finishing the last 100 pages of the book on the same day. So at the time that I'm recording this, yesterday, I spent 10 hours reading this book, 10 out of like 14 hours that I spent, you know, kind of out and about for the day. By out and about for the day, I mean I spent 7 hours in bed in the morning and afternoon just reading the last battle. Then I took care of a couple of other things like eating and stuff that I needed to do, and then I read the last 3 hours over the rest of that evening, and it was an experience. The end of this book is a lot. The last battle is a lot. And as I've said in previous episodes for this book, the last battle is basically this entire book, but it makes sense for the last battle to be split off in the chapter that it is because of the way that it is basically a final stand. That last portion takes place over the course of, I don't know, maybe half a day or something like that. And then the last 100 pages beyond that take place in not many hours more than that for the most part. Like, there's a chapter 37 through probably 44 or 45 or something like that, I'd guess, that takes place all within a day. It's a lot. That's a lot of pages. It's like 250 pages or something like that take place in these, you know, very short span of time, and a lot of stuff going on. When it comes right down to it, I'm not entirely sure how to do this diary, like, because part of what I did last week was I didn't even really do a proper beat by beat. I didn't do the more summary related thing that I've been doing for the last handful of books, and I actually liked last week's diary a lot better because of that, because it was more free form, more just my thoughts, me just outlining where things were, you know, at the start, how they ended up, and, you know, maybe a couple of scenes now and again that were kind of important in that context. And I was thinking I would do the same thing like that from last week again into this week, but really I just don't know how to cover everything besides just a couple of the broad strokes of the battle, because it's so much and it all happens at once. You know, if I had actually split the reading into multiple days and done recordings for just the portion that I read immediately afterwards, I might be able to, make a little bit more structural sense of this diary, but I just don't know what to actually do with the video. It's a lot. The last battle, the last 300 pages of this book was a lot, and it ended in a lot of really cool ways and a lot of different ways than I expected. I'm just going to go ahead and real quick pull up part of what I was saying about the book after I finished it last night, because like I said, I'm recording this the day after. Just a couple of my brief thoughts here to try to round out a little bit of spoiler-free impressions for the end of this book. Really, what I want to say about this actually comes down to a few points. It's being satisfied, being really impressed with the way that Brandon Sanderson handled a few particular aspects, and also, frankly, a confirmation, in my opinion, that Robert Jordan could not have actually finished this series. No, I'm not trying to speak ill of the dead or whatever, but just the way that Robert Jordan wrote, the way that he approached storytelling, and especially based off of the way that books 7 through 11 went, there's just no way that Robert Jordan could have finished the series and had it be anywhere near as effective as Sanderson, in my opinion. There's a few reasons for this. Part of it is because of pacing, part of it is because of prose, and part of it is because of restraint. And the restraint, honestly, is a point that applies to both the pacing and the prose. You see, Robert Jordan did not outline, and that is honestly where almost all of the issues that I have had at one point or another with the series, and I say almost all very particular because I'm not saying that every one of them, but dang near all of the problems that I've had with the series, and dang near all of the negative reputation that the Wheel of Time has as a whole, comes down to the fact that Robert Jordan was not an outliner, or it can be reasonably blamed on the fact that Robert Jordan did not outline. He had certain set piece moments, certain important scenes that he knew needed to happen at some point in the series, but from getting from one of those to the next, he didn't outline. He just kind of explored around with that while he went. And I think that this was very detrimental for the series as a whole. I mean, sure, you would not have a series as vast as The Wheel of Time is if he was an outliner from the very beginning, for example, because I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure the series was only going to be like 3 books, and then it was only going to be 6 books, and then, it was only going to be a couple more books beyond that, but every single one that Robert Jordan wrote to just, scope creep could be something that could be probably applied to the series because of just Robert Jordan having too much going on and not being able to rein himself in, and also the prose problem of, as the series went on, his prose came to be a little bit less efficient and more bloated as time went on, and nobody bothered to really restrain him in that regard either. So between story bloat, maybe not story bloat per se, but like I said, like scope creep is probably a more appropriate term, and prose bloat, as the series went on, particularly in books 7 through 11, which, as I've discussed previously on this channel, one of the most popular, maybe the most popular Wheel of Time diary is the one where I ask the question, does the slog of Wheel of Time actually exist? I have talked about how books 7 through 11 could have and should have been just 3 books instead of 5. You had a really solid trilogy in there. There are still aspects of said trilogy that I would not love quite as much as, previous books in the series, but you would have a much better arc within the series there than you currently do, solely on account of structural problems, and structural problems that almost all also derive from scope creep and prose bloat, the lack of restraint that Robert Jordan had in his writing. With all of that in mind, I do not think it is possible that Robert Jordan could have written this final arc of the series and had it be any form of as effective as Sanderson did, and that's because Sanderson had very heavy editing going on while he was writing the series for obvious reasons. The type of editing that Robert Jordan was not getting for the last 6+ books of the series, if not more than that. The type of editing that if Robert Jordan was getting while he was writing the series, he was blatantly ignoring or casting aside. I don't know which one of those is the case, but one of those two was the case. He either was not getting edited or he was not actually applying any of it. and nobody bothered to actually make sure it got done, whereas Sanderson did. So the problems of scope creep had to be taken care of, prose bloat had to be taken care of, and in many cases, certain structuring decisions had to be a little bit more sensible for the most part where possible, because, well, Sanderson was finishing this very popular series, and if any of the books were disappointing, it would probably not be great. Like, it would be it would not be a great publicity thing for Tor, for example, because, like, why'd you bring in this guy to finish the series just for him to butcher it? It's like, no, you needed the last few books to be great, and they were. I do not think that Robert Jordan, in his proclivities with writing and with the type of editing that he was receiving at the time, could have possibly ended up with an efficient enough closing for this if you were to even assume that his finale, which he planned to write as one volume, that he wanted to be, that he had been on record saying he wanted to be big enough to be required to be brought in by a cart, which inherently means that he had no intent of being sensibly efficient with it, that he was not going to show restraint with it. He would not have been able to write a final arc to the series that could have been 3 books. I just do not think it would have happened. I think it probably would have been 5 or 6 books. This final arc would have been if Robert Jordan was in charge, on account of his prose problems and because of his inability to rein himself in and to actually, like, keep everything that was going on in focus, because that was a major problem for books. Like, quite frankly, you can go all the way back to book 7 and really, but I think for the most part, I think it's like books 9 through 11 is when it becomes obvious that there was just too much going on. RJ did not have enough of an idea of what he was actually doing with a lot of it, and or pretty evidently forgot about some of it at various different points as well, not to mention certain retconning issues that he had that Sanderson effectively fixed in this final book here. But for the most part, what it comes down to is just the way that this book finalizes everything was largely only possible because of how effectively Sanderson was able to actually rein in everything that Robert Jordan was doing with the 2 prior books. And that's why this book, as the last battle, is so good. And that's why the ultimate last battle itself is so good, is because there are so many disparate things from the series that either didn't mean anything before, or had been completely forgotten, or were just random things that, you know, like just references to previous books, like the beginning of the series, for example, to make the wheel the circular, that Brandon Sanderson was able to do in one form or another, whether it was some of the ideas were his, or whether they were notes from Jordan, whether they were things that came about because of editing, doesn't really matter. The point is that this finale was able to actually wrap everything up in a way that felt genuinely satisfying, which I do not believe would have been possible under Robert Jordan's guidance. I hate to be that guy, but I do not think that Robert Jordan was cut out to write his own series, largely because his own series only became as big as it was because he had no restraint, and that lack of restraint meant that it just would not have ended very well. So my spoiler-free impressions of this book is that it actually closed everything in really great ways, and I think that Sanderson managed to do so very effectively. You know, I think that especially in the epilogue, the way that the epilogue wraps up a lot of stuff allowed for a lot of thematic poignancy, both in the last battle itself and throughout the last 100 pages afterwards, that allowed, like, Rand's arc in particular to actually have a proper thematic undertone to it, whereas throughout the entirety of the series it didn't seem like it had one, or if it did, it was pretty confused. It just wasn't, you weren't really sure what the point was. And I'm not saying that everything has to have a point. You can enjoy things for enjoyment's sake, but if you're going to have a series this long, there's probably should be a point to it, and Sanderson was able to finally bring out that point through the end of the book, and especially finalize that with the epilogue. He was also able to handle the last battle in a way that just allowed those themes, that allowed the depth that the series has kind of ignored for the most part to actually shine, because that's one of the things about Wheel of Time is a lot of people give it a lot of credit for being as big as it is, not just the length of the series, but like the world and just how many names there are and stuff like this. But there does come a point, and I tend to fall on this side of the scale, where it eventually becomes wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, where just because there's thousands or many hundreds of named characters, and by the time you add in places and secondary names for characters and other random detailed stuff, by the time you have thousands of like proper nouns alone in the course of a series, at what point does that become more surface level stuff as opposed to anything that actually matters? And there's a lot about the Wheel of Time that fails to matter by the time you get to book 6 onwards. I would say post book 6, you're starting to, a lot of names and a lot of stuff is starting to go in one ear, out the other, if you have any form of sense, because you can't possibly fit all of the stuff into your brain, least of all on a first-time reading, and actually have it all work and have it be effective. That's not to say that there isn't depth to the world, or that there isn't depth to the series or anything like that. It's just that the focus, the balance of that was a little bit off, to the point that it started to feel more wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, and the depth that was there in certain places was largely overlooked or underutilized, is the way to put it. And you could also say the same thing about a lot of side characters and side plots, things that should have allowed for the world and the scope of the story to feel very vast, but sometimes didn't, because those side plots or side characters and whatnot would just be forgotten about, or would take 2 or 3 books in between seeing them now and again. And so, you know, the depth that the series had just failed to really be deep for the vast majority of the series. And once again, to bring that back around to my point, A Memory of Light manages to actually display a lot of that depth in a way that actually feels that way. That makes it feel like there was depth all along, you know, and some of that it feels very retroactive, which isn't the best thing, but considering that Sanderson was just finishing the series, this is another one of those reasons why I think that Robert Jordan wasn't cut out to finish the series, is because I don't think he could have actually brought all of that together. He might have, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I do not believe that he was actually capable of it, just based off of what he did right. One final thing that I'll say for this section of the video, I suppose, since we're already very far into the video, actually, surprisingly, is that not just the themes that I mentioned before, there's also a ton of subtle aspects of the series with regards to magic and world building and general character moments, motivations, the factional lines of the world. A lot of subtle stuff is done with all of these broader categories of the storytelling that Sanderson also managed to handle in a way that, once again, allows them to actually mean something. It's pretty similar to the thematic idea that a lot of things that just failed to mean anything to me for like the space of 7 books or something like that, even in like The Gathering Storm, there were things that didn't hit the way that they would have if any of those things meant anything the 3 or 5 books prior. That were able to actually come back around and retroactively mean something in A Memory of Light, and that was really impactful. This is one of the reasons why I love endings, why I love a climax and a good resolution to a story, is because if you can tie together a bunch of stuff, including things that I've forgotten, including things that seemed like they maybe weren't anything at all, including things that are major, and I shouldn't have to emphasize that, but Robert Jordan also managed to not do much with major stories either a lot of the time, cough, parent, cough. When you're actually able to wrap up a lot of things and have all of those things actually mean something, even if some of it is retroactive, it can make you look back on that stuff more fondly. So I actually look back on a lot of moments from earlier in the series, even during the slog arc, that I look at more fondly now because of A Memory of Light than I did before, because Sanderson actually managed to make some of those things mean something more than they did. One of those things I can't actually say right here because of spoiler reasons, but yeah, it's just really, really cool because Robert Jordan, and this is actually the reason that I said to my friends last night in Discord, I wrote it this way. Robert Jordan kept so many things vague and nebulous for no reason, so it was hard to care because it didn't matter. There were a lot of things that not only didn't seem like it mattered, they just genuinely did not matter because of the way that Robert Jordan handled them, that Sanderson was able to make those things and everything else matter at the same time. And also make sense in cases where I was confused about certain aspects. So yeah, that's going to be the end of like my spoiler-free rambling impressions. Once again, similar to last week's diary, I do not have notes or anything for this, so I have no idea what the spoiler section that we're heading into is going to talk about. I'm just probably going to go over some of the broad strokes and, you know, kind of talk in the context that I did for the spoiler-free section, but give a couple of spoiler examples, I guess, in some spots. So I have no idea how this is going to go, but yeah, starting the spoiler section now, where the last battle to me is split up into like 5 different sections, I think. There's 5 different portions of the last battle, not necessarily in terms of like ordering, but in like, there's a little bit of ordering, but like 5 different focuses of what's going on. There's the very start of the last battle, just jumping right into the spoilers here, where everything immediately goes wrong, which is very funny. And then you have a portion where a recovery period is happening, and then you have a part where everything goes wrong again, and it's kind of like, oh, we're very screwed here. And then you have the ultimate recovery moment that sees everything basically made up for through a couple of particularly major moments. And then the 5th part of the last battle is just what Rand's doing, everything going on in Shayol Ghul, because that's a very metaphysical fight that I enjoyed a lot. But as far as the last battle itself is concerned, I don't really know what to say about it because, you know, going beat by beat in the plot doesn't make sense. Like, I don't want to just summarize for you the last battle. There's no point in that, but I do want to go over some of my impressions of how things went. One of the things that made the last battle so interesting to read was because of the way that it started with everything going wrong, as I said. And everything goes wrong because the plans that are made for the last battle, as we discussed last week, was all of the fronts except for the one at Shayol Ghul itself. All of the other fronts are combined at the field of Merrilor, waiting to be attacked by the Trollocs that are from Kandor, plus the Sharans, and who are led by Demandred with them, plus the Trollocs and all the other Dark Friends, not Dark Friends, the Shadow Spawn that are coming from the Tarwin's Gap front that are, you know, converging and centralizing upon this point to battle. And apparently there's like a week's worth of like planning that goes in between these moments when that retreat happens and then the actual battle starts, where like Matt, as the commander of all of the armies, as determined last week, they, alongside everybody else, they come up with this very detailed battle plan of how things are going, but Matt has the suspicion and basically the knowledge that if, you know, all of the great commanders were able to be compromised in the way that they were by, like, Graendal's compulsion, for example, it makes sense that there would be compromises to their battle plans, that the Sharans and all the Shadow Spawn would know their battle plans, having listened in over the week. So Matt had basically made these battle plans, expecting and ultimately coming to throw them all out the window last minute and do something different to try to keep the Shadow Spawn on their toes. And this is why I say that everything goes wrong right at the very start, because part of how we learn that this is the case is because Matt determines, is like, no, this is the plan, we're going to set it up, and then we're going to get everybody out of there and do something different, and things start to go wrong because Demandred is a lot stronger than everybody anticipates him being, because he happens to be linked in a full circle, which is a lot of people linked together, and he also has a very powerful Seangrial with him. That between the Seangrial and the linking means that he's able to launch an attack upon the dragons that are set up on a big hill on the battlefield in a way that basically destroys them outright, even though Matt had sent them warning, ahead of time, like, get off the hill now, even though they were confused, like, we just made the plans to be up here, now you're telling us to retreat, and that was kind of part of what Matt was doing, but Demandred is actually able to set off the initial attack a little bit too early against those dragons, and, like, kind of destroys them, which is an interesting moment, but that sets the battle off on a very poor foot, relatively speaking. What did I get a message for? Oh, work-related stuff. I probably shouldn't ignore that, but we're going to finish recording this video first. Everything starts going pretty poorly just from this very moment. It's not, like, terrible, but things start off more poorly than you would expect. You have multiple fronts of the battle that's still going on, a lot of movements that are going on in the battlefield that Matt is directing, and generally speaking, things are being played like a game of cards. This is the way that Matt goes ahead and puts it. That's the metaphor that he creates. It's like, it's not like dice, because dice is random. It's more like a game of cards where sometimes you just have to make moves based off of what you have. Sometimes you have to lose certain battles to make the ultimate move to actually have a winning hand. Like, once you have a winning hand, you have to use that, and sometimes you just straight up don't have winning hands. You just kind of have to make do. Sometimes you have to give a little so that you can take a lot. Like, there's a lot of balance in the way that Matt's metaphorical game playing is going on here, and this is the game that Demandred and Matt are playing throughout the battle, and the movements of their soldiers and their groups, and the way that certain fronts are fought at any given moment. All of it is based off of this give and take scenario, up until a point where Matt ultimately determines in his command tent that, wait a minute, Demandred still seems to be a little bit too knowledgeable of some of the things that are going on here. There's probably a spy in here. There's probably a spy in the command tent, or a spy that is managing to make it into the command tent to hear about some of the orders and is able to pass that information along to the enemy, and that's not good. So we need to figure out some subtle way to get an upper hand on that. And one of the more exciting parts of the battle, in my opinion, was actually that political aspect over here, because as it turns out, if you remember from way earlier in the book, Moghedien was sent by Moradin to join Demandred in whatever he was doing, and since Demandred is now here at the battle, it can be presumed, hey, where's Moghedien in all this? That is because Moghedien is hiding, and she is the spy that is in the command tent. She's more specifically in the command tent under a disguise that allows her to be, one of the servants of the Shan-Shan. Or at least that's how she's discovered, as being a spy in one moment. But, like, there's an assassination attempt that occurs on Matt. Of course, there are gray men that are sent there to try to assassinate him. He manages to make it out, of course, but Swan actually dies. That was not something that I saw coming, but Min has been with the Shan-Shan and with Matt this whole time. That's something that I didn't make note of last week, but when she was sent to give information from Brine to the Shan-Shan about some orders of things to do, or something, I forget off the top of my head. She was sent over there, and then she was basically kept by Tuon because of her visions and seeing things over people's head. Tuon saw this as being an omen seer or something like that, doom seer, because of the omens and whatnot, and because Tuon is obsessed with omens, she wanted to keep Min, so Min has been with them, and Min is obviously in the command tent when this assassination attempt goes off. Swan was able to come over and try to help when, there was things going on in the command tent. She happens to die while saving Matt, and Min tells her, it's just like, no, I still see the symbols over your head, indicating that you and Gareth Brine still need to be near each other to be safe. Because, of course, we had assumed way back in, like, the Gathering Storm that they were safe because they had saved each other because they were near each other. So Swan dies, and Gareth goes crazy, and he dies as a result as well. So they're dead, which sucks. But there is that assassination attempt on Matt, and Matt is able to kind of escape with some of the others, and he's able to do so and reset up shop in such a way that he is able to, like, subtly and politically maneuver with Tuon, and Tuon is able to get this impression from him, basically, that, like, they're supposed to split and make some sort of political suggestion that the Shan-Shan are out of the fight and they're not going to support anymore, and they actually do make a retreat from the battle battle in the middle of the field, which was a really interesting sequence. The Shanchan leave, and they're back in like Ebudar for a portion of the fight, and they're trying to determine whether they're actually going to go back and help again on Matt's command, because that's the assumption, is that they're leaving and then they're going to come back, or that's what Matt hopes anyway. But it turns out that the spy within the command tent actually wasn't direct. It might not have directly been Moghedien the entire time, because she was able to have was it Seleucia herself? I don't think it was Seleucia. It was one of the other commanders, I think. There was one of the upper-ranking folk in the Shanchan army that was under Moghedien's influence, who was probably the one able to actually get the information, who was trying to subtly make sure that the Shanchan did not return to the fight, and that was the reason why Matt and Tuon, they had like a type of argument, a public argument about the fight. And Matt's just like, fine, leave, I don't need you anyway, and so the Shanchan leave. And the reason that they did that way was to try to subvert this spy that they're pretty sure is around somewhere, that they're trying to weed out. And so the spy is now trying to make sure that the Shanchan don't return to the fight, and that's what's happening in Ebudar. But Min, because she goes with the Shanchan, she goes with Tuon, is able to actually see the signs over Moghedien's head as supposedly just a random servant. It's just like, wait a minute, this isn't a noble person. This servant here should not have all of the signs that I'm seeing here. And she's able to put together some of the signs, some of the omens, alongside some of the omens, like the one that she sees under the Shanchan commander, who was, very against the idea of going back to help Matt, and being like, that person's under control. This suspicious servant person shouldn't have all the signs they have. That person is probably the spy. And so she is making an announcement at one point, and I condemn this particular person because Tuon had made her a truth speaker, for example, and that meant that she could publicly speak against Tuon if she needed to, so Min could. She was like, I'm going to say that Tuon is making a mistake if she does this thing, according to this commander says. I'm asserting that commander is the spy, and needs to be taken care of. And then she sees in the corner of her eye Moghedien in the form of this other servant, relax, basically. She reacts when Min starts to make the declaration, and then relaxes when she's not the one called out. But then Min throws a knife at her and nearly kills her, but she's able to escape just in time. So that means that the Shanchan were being subverted, and Tuon does agree to go back to help Matt because of that. So the Shanchan are able to come back to the fight. So that's where Moghedien is placed in the fight. Obviously Demandred is in the fight as well. Demandred is pretty convinced throughout the entirety of the battle that Rand is on the battlefield somewhere. His pride, his hubris, his desperation to fight Rand personally, to fight Lews Therin personally. He believes that Matt is Lews Therin through part of the fight as well, mind you. But his desperation to actually fight Rand is the reason why he is here, and he kind of goes a little bit too forward with some attacks and with some demands. Taim is on the battlefield as well, and Taim is kind of pushed about by Demandred with some of the things that he has to get done. So these three are all on the battlefield. Moghedien in a little bit more of a subversive aspect, which is pretty fitting for her character. Demandred in this very pride forward, I'm going to fight Rand, I'm going to kill Rand way, which again is pretty fitting for the random moments we've had from him throughout the series, even though he's definitely not the most satisfying Forsaken of them all. And Taim, as having been raised to the Chosen by the Dark One, by having been initially recruited by Demandred, is an interesting little aspect there. So Taim wants to, take over from Demandred, because Demandred's pride and hubris. Taim's this guy's crazy, trying to fight Rand personally. I need to get rid of him so I can be in charge, or something like that. Some of the other Forsaken are being dealt with in other fronts of the battle. Of course, Moradin is up in Shayol Ghul combating Rand, and by combating Rand, I mean he's got Rand in this stuck position while Rand is metaphysically fighting the Dark One, but we'll talk about that one later. And Graendal has been going about hopping between dreams and the dream world and the real world, and haunting people's nightmares, and compelling them, I guess, to, turn to the Dark One, basically. Not actually turn them, of course, but to, compulse them to do bad things, like she did with the Great Commanders. She's still doing that kind of thing, and has to combat Perrin a little bit more in there. Actually, no, she doesn't combat Perrin more in there. She actually ends up combating the Aiel and everybody up in Shayol Ghul directly, and gets taken down by Aviendha in the end in a very satisfying way. But like, so all the Forsaken are doing things that are fitting for their characters, and they actually matter and are interesting in a way that I liked. That was something that I also told my friends in Discord last night, was I thought that Sando handled the fates of all the Forsaken very well, because most of the series sees them being kind of you know, people call them cartoon villains, and while I think that's like not the most generous in certain circumstances, there does come a point where it's not exactly wrong, where the bickering and back and forth between them, and the fact that none of them really get much of anything done actually, is pretty cartoon villain of them. They're all very arrogant and selfish in ways that is just like, okay, why are these guys actually grouped together? Like, all the backstabbing and stuff, like, why don't these guys just work together in any capacity? And so the last battle actually sees them sort of working together in some capacity, despite still having some of that selfishness to them. I thought that that was handled really well. Having them all taken out in ways that feel legitimately fitting to their characters was also very baller, because all of them get taken care of in some way that is very fitting for their characters in previous manner. That is very interesting. That's also something that I guess we'll kind of talk about a little bit later as well. But so, like, in the last battle, there's just a lot of stuff going on. A lot of stuff primarily with the Forsaken, with battles moving around. There's multiple scenes with Demandred that are really engaging. For example, throughout the fight, multiple people go to combat him directly. This is one of the things that I found that really worked throughout the entirety of this really long chapter, was the fact that Gawain first goes to try to kill Demandred and gets killed, which puts Egwene in massive grief, obviously, because he dies. That was actually pretty heart-wrenching. Galad goes to try to fight Demandred and gets taken down, and he doesn't actually die, but you're led to believe for a bit that he does. He just barely manages to not die, however. But so Galad goes and fights him as well, and Lan does, and this is a funny moment where, you know, Demandred's just like, why is Luce there and sending all of these people to fight me? But Lan does kill Demandred and nearly dies himself, but doesn't, somehow. Again, something that I guess we'll sort of mention a little bit later. And so Lan is able to take down Demandred. That's pretty cool. So Demandred's hubris caused him to be taken down in a way that was absolutely not the way that he wanted or intended. And the fact that he was unwilling to, like, give up that part of himself is the reason that he died. Like, pride goeth before the fall and all of that. So there was that. There was a lot of interesting stuff with the Aes Sedai going on as well. Of course, one of the craziest moments of the last battle was just Egwene going through, and after Gawain dying, like, collapsing in grief, of course, but her managing to overcome that by taking into account words that she had heard one time, that the only way to really overpower the grief of losing a warder in the immediacy is to be able to combat that with emotions or anything that is stronger than that, because in that grief it's difficult to channel. It's also difficult to channel consistently, but Egwene is able to overcome this by just pure rage. She's able to utilize that rage to her advantage, and she's able to use and Angreal to support herself as well, and she is able to re-rally forces of the Aes Sedai who had otherwise been being destroyed by Demandred and Balefire throughout the course of the fight, and rally them up together to go up against Taim, because Demandred at one point in the fight gave Taim his Seangreal to actually get rid of Egwene, because he was like, just go take care of that Witch Queen. Like, we need to make sure that the Aes Sedai are basically crippled, and doing that will cripple them. So Taim is set off on that task to battle Egwene, and Egwene is on the task to battle Taim, and he's able to get through that sequence in really satisfying way, because Taim is absolutely destroying everything with Balefire because of the Seangreal, just has that power to do that. Really tense sequence, and Egwene ultimately comes to really utilize this thing that has been kind of foreshadowed throughout the entire book. It's mentioned a lot, where just the sheer amount of balefire that is being used by all of the Forsaken is causing the world and the pattern to just utterly collapse, basically. There are portions of it where like cracks just open in the ground, and where the holes that they form just like look into oblivion, basically, before they start to look a little bit more normal. But as the last battle continues to go on, and as more balefire is used, you have a lot of moments where the ground is like starting to really shake up and have issues, and Egwene is trying to combat this because like she's trying to go up against Taim. It's just like, I should probably use balefire against him, because how else am I going to defeat him? But she also understands and, you know, knows the danger of the balefire, knows that using more of it will just cause the pattern to collapse quicker, so that's not the way that she should do it. But she recalls like the battle at the White Tower against the Shan-Chan back in the Gathering Storm, and what Perrin had told her in Tel'aran'rhiod while that battle had gone down, while a portion of that battle had gone down. And him saying that balefire was just a weave, and Egwene finally realizes that balefire being just a weave, and the fact that basically all other weaves have an opposite weave, she's like instinctually able to just develop and use a weave that is the opposite of balefire, that instead of destroying parts of the pattern is able to repair parts of the pattern that are falling apart. And she is able to use this and combat balefire head on with this, and uses that to overpower what Taim is doing and kills Taim that way. So Taim's further hubris of thinking that he could be one of the, you know, more powerful Forsaken in general, but him having even Demandred's Sangreal and dying to Egwene in this way, Egwene sacrificing herself at the same time she dies in that moment, is also something that's really impactful, allowed for Taim being a chosen, being a Forsaken in this book, to actually be really satisfying despite him not being Demandred. The fact that, like I mentioned briefly earlier, that Demandred was the one who recruited him was also like kind of a funny little subversive way to allow for the connection between them from earlier books to maybe retroactively make slightly more sense than the retcon might otherwise generally suggest, I guess. But that was an interesting moment. Egwene also is able in these final moments to talk to Logain, because the Black Tower is involved in the fight. The Black Tower is able to come in and help at various moments. There's various different satisfying moments with like Andral and Pavara in the fight. I still really like them. I really liked their story. Some of my favorite side characters in the entire series after just 2 books. I know Pavara existed before that, and I actually kind of liked her before that as well, even back during the White Tower politics stuff. But Andral and her specifically together are able to do some plots against the last battle that are all really cool. Logain does actually get his shining moment that we're basically promised, and that like fits with his character. I do think I generally agree with the people who think that Logain is a little bit underutilized within the series, including in the last battle itself. But I was very satisfied by the way that Min's viewings of glory for him in battle were to be basically satisfied by Egwene, you know, in her final moments, basically having her new warder. This is actually something that I completely hadn't even mentioned up to this point. Part of how Egwene also dealt with the grief of losing Gawain was, you know, bonding another warder, and she actually bonded Lylewyn, so the Shan-Chan. Now is a very interesting sequence. Of course, bonding somebody else doesn't like fill the hole that the other warder leaves, but having part of the warder stuff going on was just supposed to be an aid in general. Right before Egwene dies, she releases the bond to Lylewyn, so Lylewyn doesn't go insane. You know, like Gareth Brine did. But so Lylewyn is able to take a message from Egwene to Logain, since Logain is able... Well, actually, that's kind of what I was saying with Andral and Pavara. One of the things that Andral and Pavara is able to do is Andral's able to, like, disguise himself as one of the other Ashaman, one of the turned Ashaman, and go and confront... maybe Taim directly, maybe it was Demandred directly. It was whoever had the seals. So it was Taim. Yeah, he was able to actually go to a camp where Taim was, because Taim had the seals, just as we discussed last week. Taim had the seals to the Dark One's prison. Um, he had somehow managed to get those. I don't know when or how. It's something that I would honestly be really keen to pay attention to if I were to reread the series, but I have no idea if it would actually be on the page. In either case, Andril is able to disguise himself, and Taim uses another weave to disguise him as Andril again to go do a different task, which was a really funny scene. I don't know how to explain it without getting too far into details that don't really matter. The point is that Andril is able to, like, basically stumble over himself a little bit as a result of some things within a scene and basically steal the pouch from off of Taim's person that contains the seals to the Dark One's prison, so he's able to get those back to Logain, and Egwene gets word that Logain has them. And in her last moments, she tells Lyowen to go to Logain and tell him that he's responsible for breaking the seals and that he will know when. Just look for the light, basically. When there is a great light, you will know to break the seals in that moment. And so this kind of goes back to what another part of the earlier book was saying about how if the seals needed to be broken, Egwene thought that they would need to be broken a lot later than Rand was initially anticipating to, and Moraine convincing Rand to hand over the fake seals at the time, but, you know, hand over the seals to Egwene so that she could break them when she felt necessary, would make more sense. Egwene's able to just piece everything together and be like, just wait for the light. Whenever Rand needs the seals to be broken, we will know that the seals need to be broken, and you will know because of that light, so just do it then. That message is able to get to Logain, and that part is taken care of. Egwene, of course, dies, like I said, and that was, funnily enough, Egwene dying in the last battle was actually one of the only things about this book that I had directly spoiled for me. And I think that happened accidentally. I think somebody, it was spoiler tagged in a Discord conversation, but the book wasn't tagged for that one, and the conversation had previously been about a book that I had read, so I think I had clicked on a spoiler tag that was not marked as being for this, and saw reference to Egwene dying, so, like, I kind of knew that she was going to die at some point, but even despite that, her death was, like, everything leading right up to that moment in the confrontation with Taim. All of that stuff was, like, one of the most tense moments of the entire book for me. I think it was arguably more tense than even the metaphysical stuff going on with Rand's part of the storyline. But so, like, all of that's going on. Demandred's now dead. Taim's now dead. Moghedien is uncovered, and when she returns to the battlefield, she tries to take control of the Sharans by disguising herself as Demandred again, which kind of starts to work, but then doesn't, because you remember when I said that the dragons at the very beginning of the fight were able to be, like, kind of destroyed, basically. Well, they were all taken out of the fight by a gateway to a cave that was, like, inaccessible by any way besides a gateway, and were being repaired on with Talmanes and everybody else throughout the course of the fight. And when they are repaired enough to actually be used, they decide that they're actually just going to open gateways from this cave to different parts of the battlefield and just fire from the cave directly. That's a battle tactic that they use, and one of these battle tactics basically takes down the group of the Sharans that Moghedien is immediately trying to take care of. And at the end of the fight, she somehow managed to survive, but she was kind of, like, harmed, and she tries to get away, but she doesn't manage to get away because there is Shan-Chan after the very end of the battle perusing the battlefield for channelers who that they can, you know, enslave, specifically Sharans, because of course they had the agreement with Egwene that they wouldn't enslave any Aes Sedai or any of those other people that are directly involved with the agreement that Rand had going on with the Dragon's Peace. And Moghedien is one of these channelers that they find, which takes us back to when, you know, Moghedien was chained way earlier in the books by an Adam, and that being, like, the worst part of her life, basically. And that was able to reflect on her and her character in a way. Like, she can no longer be subversive and hide in the shadows like she was originally planning to do. She survives, just like, well, the last battle's over, but, like, I could still try to do something. And I don't even have the Dark One to punish me now because he's re-imprisoned, because it's at the very end of the fight. Again, we'll get to that in a little bit. But so Moghedien ends up getting chained, so she is taken care of at the end of the book by being taken prisoner by the Shan-Chan, which also puts her in the same place as, like, Elida, which is very funny, to me personally anyway. But so like all that's going on, what are some other aspects of the fight that I haven't even really talked about? Like there's a lot of stuff that goes on, man, and not all of it is necessarily super important. I'm thinking of certain scenes and it's like, I don't really need to bring that up. I don't need to mention that. Just suffice it to say that the Field of Merrilor fight starts off on the wrong foot, and then things are going okay, and then they get very bad again once, Matt and the command tent and stuff gets attacked and the Shan-Chan have to leave, and then in between then and the Shan-Chan returning, things start to get worse and worse because of just the way that things have to be taken care of. There's also the part of this finale of the series here where the Horn of Valir is able to actually make it back to the Field of Merrilor. That was also a very cool sequence where like Zareen and everybody's able to, commandeer a particular camp that is outside Shayol Ghul, so they don't actually have to make it into the Pits of Doom or anything like that to actually get the Horn of Valir, but they're able to like make a trick to get back to the Field of Merrilor. But then it turns out that like what was her name, like Eravine or something, I forget her name, but one of a particular Aes Sedai that was with them, or somebody, I don't remember. So there was somebody who was with them who was the Dark Friend, and it turned out that Harnan and Vannan, who we talked about last week trying to steal the Horn of Valir, weren't actually trying to steal the Horn of Valir. They were just trying to steal the Tabak that they thought that Zareen was transporting, and it was the fact that they had discovered the Horn of Valir that made them scream, which attracted the attention of everybody else, and that kind of alerted the Dark Friend that was amongst them that the Horn of Valir was there. And so they make it to the Field of Merrilor, but everything nearly goes wrong because the Dark Friends are nearly able to reclaim the Horn of Valir and take that away, but then Zareen is able to get that back anyway somehow. She tries to go take that to Matt. She's kind of unable to. She's unable to escape Trollocs in time, so she has to give it to Olver to take to Matt. And Olver, because Matt's like still on the battlefield somewhere, doing a bunch of fighting and stuff. But anyway, Olver tries to get it to Matt, but he's unable to. He's cornered into a cave by a bunch of Trollocs, and he ends up blowing the Horn of Valir, so it turns out that there was a time that Matt died, and that disconnected him from the Horn of Valir, so anybody could have blown it, actually. But so Olver does, and so he becomes the Horn Bearer, which is quite interesting, and so all of the heroes of the Horn are able to emerge and make a difference in the fight, and continue and finish off the battle alongside everybody else. I don't even think I've really mentioned anything that's been going on with Elaine during the fight, because a lot of it is just her being like on the front lines with her soldiers. There comes a point in time where her and her people are kind of ambushed, and she has to be taken away by Birgitte to safety so that they can rally again because times are really tough. That doesn't go very well because, like, you remember Merrilor, who was the captain of Elaine's guard back during the Slog arc. He was actually able to emerge and be part of the fight and actually find Elaine, and is like about to torment her, and Birgitte dies in this moment, but then she revives with the blowing of the Horn of Valir and is able to save Elaine anyway, so that was a really cool moment. Elaine's babies were nearly cut out of her stomach, by the way. That was nearly something that happened. It didn't, but it nearly happened because of Merrilor. That crazy psychopath. But so like that was stuff that happened during the fight, and the reason that I remembered to mention that was because Birgitte is tied to the Horn, and the Horn got blown, and the Horn didn't get blown until after she died. Her dying was something that I found very surprising. I honestly was not expecting that to happen, and less than that, I didn't even consider her returning with the Horn of Valir, but she did, and she was able to return with all of her memories again, so she's still bound to the Horn despite having been pulled out of Tel'aran'rhiod into the real world way back in like book 5 or whenever it was that happened. So that's really cool, actually. Really happy about that. Birgitte deserves that. So she's going to be reborn at some point in time to be with her Geidel, Kane, or whatever his name is, at some point in the future. So that's how fun, how happy. Even Noel, Jane Farstrider, who died at the end of Towers of Midnight, after we learned that he was Jane Farstrider and sacrificed himself to let Matt and Tom and Moraine escape the Tower of Genji. He revives and returns with the Horn of Valyrian. He saves Olver from the Trollocs. That was also a very meaningful moment. Like, just a lot of little things sort of like this, where things from throughout the series that I didn't expect to make a return did. And that was really satisfying. One of the things that I found more interesting, or more surprising, I guess, about the last battle in Tyre is the fact that Perrin is just absent. Because at the end of chapter 36, right before the last battle, he's injured by Slayer and ends up somehow makes it back into the field of Merrilor in the Wolf Dream, and then he's able to be pulled out of there and saved by Master Luhan, and then therefore transferred to Mayene to actually heal a little bit, or to rest a little bit as well. And so he actually sits out the entirety of the last battle chapter and a few chapters even beyond that, which I found very interesting and also surprising. But Perrin also got a pretty satisfying close to his arc, in my opinion, in the books here, because he's able to have a little bit more discussion with Master Luhan and learn from Luhan that it was important for him when he was young and in the Two Rivers to learn how to control himself in such a way that he wasn't accidentally hurting people, but he never learned how to actually use his power in the way that he could, because he actually has that power. Luhan is able to actually tell him this, and Perrin reflects on this fact. He also reflects on, some of the conversations that he's had with some other people, and goes after Slayer one more time. He's able to get one of the Aes Sedai to basically sap away all of his exhaustion, or make him not feel his exhaustion, so that he can go one last time to go fight Slayer, and he does. And the final battle between Slayer and Perrin was really satisfying and cool. I really enjoyed that sequence, especially since it brought back the flicker motif, I guess, that we've seen a couple of times in the series with different stuff, where Perrin is able to really come into his own, and he's able to flash between the waking world and the dream world just as much as Slayer is, and part of the fight between him and Slayer is flipping back and forth, like every heartbeat flipping back and forth. So like simultaneously being the wolf in the wolf dream and also the man in the real world bearing his power wrought hammer and defeating Slayer in the wolf dream here, because he has this pull that he has to go help Rand, and so he goes up there, defeats Slayer. That's really cool sequence, a very cinematic sequence actually, like just imagining the fight between Slayer and Perrin in the final chapters of the book was like really cool. I actually really enjoyed imagining that portion. Matt also, after the Field of Merrilor fight is done, feels that he is being pulled towards Rand as well, that Tavern pull. It's kind of the same way that Perrin has for a while, so he feels that pull. And to be fair, Matt's been feeling that for a while, but he feels it most strongly after the battle is over. He's just like, okay, I've got to go over there too now. And he actually goes up to Shayol Ghul with Olver and the Horn of Valyr, since Olver is now the horn bearer, and Matt is able to actually go up there. Matt confronts Padan Fain one final time, because Padan Fain has like the 50th name that he has ever had in the series. Padan Fain has somehow managed to be part of the darkness so resolutely, and this actually reflects upon the prologue, that brief POV that we had from him. I think he had a POV in the prologue of the book. Did he? That might have been in the last book. I don't remember. But there was a POV where like Fain was able to do what he wanted with Trollocs and stuff, like just consume and feed. Padan Fain has become, or in some sense, some part of him has become part of the mist of My Shadar, which is like the mist all the way back from Shadar Logoth, back in Eye of the World. So like Padan Fain is so deeply dark friendish, so deeply evil, that he has become the evil mist himself. He has a physical form, but part of him has become the mist. Matt is able to take care of Padan Fain and kill him. Both in like the mist form, I guess, but the physical form, and is able to actually leave the ruby dagger that originally corrupted him, again, way back in Eye of the World, in a way that closed off Padan Fain's arc in a cool way. I think that Padan Fain is like probably the most interesting villain of the series, and is severely underutilized, but every moment that he does have in the series, especially in the early books, but every moment that he does have in the series is sufficiently creepy and cool, and I love it. I do think that he was a little bit underutilized throughout the series at large, however, in favor of the Forsaken, with the Forsaken not being as interesting as him, which is unfortunate, but I found this close for him, especially with Matt being the one to defeat him with the dagger, was just really cool. I thought that moment was cool. You also have those two up there in Shayol Ghul to basically help take care of what's going on in Shayol Ghul, because there's a lot going on in Shayol Ghul, actually, that I've just not even talked about up to this point, because it's a completely different front of the battle. But so the Aiel are up here fighting. The wolves in the wolf dream are trying to fight Slayer until Perrin is able to kill him, and then the wolves are actually called by the Horde of Valyr in Shayol Ghul when Ulver arrives and blows it, and so the wolves are manifested as spirits in the waking world because of the Horn of Valyr, and the heroes also come to help against all of everything that's going on there. So there was actually a very tense sequence where Graendal up in Shayol Ghul was actually able to turn and compulse a bunch of the Aiel and some of the other people that were up there, including Ruark, who Aviendha happens to kill as a result of all of this. Just going to throw that out there. Graendal's actually combating a bunch of people, and some of the women channelers like Amis and Aviendha, of course, Olivia, some others are trying to fight Graendal as best they can, and they're doing their best. Darkhounds arrive, and so the wolves are actually trying to fight the Darkhounds. Like I said, Matt and Perrin are dealing with some of the stuff up here. There's a lot going on in Shayol Ghul, just too much to really talk about, but it all ends up working out. And in the final moments, Aviendha is actually skirmishing with Graendal specifically, and there's a gateway that's open. I think this is what happened. There was a gateway that was open that Aviendha actually tampered with in specific ways to make that weave explode, basically, and it exploded while Graendal was forming a compulsion weave to use against Aviendha, which I guess turned around and worked back on herself because of the way that the weave was interrupted, and so Graendal ends up compulsing herself to Aviendha's bidding, which was a really funny moment. So again, her being taken care of in a way that was fitting for her character. Just all of Forsaken being taken care of in ways that were fitting for their character. That was really cool. There's also the Pits of Doom, what Rand's actually got going on down there, that also all occurred. There was the wolves, obviously, like I said, in the wolf dream, were kind of guarding that cave from Slayer, so that Slayer couldn't go in there and interrupt Rand and kill him during that sequence. There was also Ghul, who had been in the wolf dream the entire time while Perrin was, out cold. So props to Ghul for managing to survive. He was able to keep various different people from managing to make it into the cave, so he did good there. Tom in the waking world, because Tom had joined Nynaeve and Moraine and Rand to the Pits of Doom in the waking world, he in the waking world was able to stop a bunch of people who were disguising themselves from as other people to try to make it into the Pits of Doom. He was able to stop people from making it into the Pits of Doom in the waking world. So Rand was set. He was being protected on both sides. And in the Pits of Doom itself, there's also stuff that's going on down there. Nynaeve is actually able to use her herbs and, stitching and stuff well enough to keep, what's her name? Alana from dying. So Rand doesn't end up going insane while he's combating the Dark One in some metaphysical realm, so that's good. And speaking of the metaphysical realm, that was honestly really good thematic stuff came from this. So there's actually a shocking amount of not Rand from in the last 300 pages of the book in general. It's actually quite shocking how little Rand POV there is throughout the end of the book. But it really worked out because I think that this part of the fight ended up really sitting well with me, and that is because Rand's fight with the Dark One is, the term that I've been saying this entire video for good reason, is metaphysical. And it's very much not of the real world. Rand has a point while he's combating Moradin that we talked about a week or two ago, I don't remember at this point, where his foot touches this black void wall thing, and that transports him into the outside of the pattern or something, just some metaphysical realm basically, where he and the Dark One are having an argument, and they come to fight in this realm by basically showing each other visions of the future and the way that the world will be when the Dark One beats Rand, for example. The Dark One tries to show Rand some of these things, and Rand tries to combat that. It's just like, no, that's not how that's going to be. It's going to be this way. They have a couple different bouts of this, and these bouts just spread throughout the throughout other scenes of the last battle. You have one, and then the reaction, and then you have the other, and the reaction, and just very figurative scenes that go through and deal with the thematic undertones of the Dark One versus, light, I guess, itself, in really interesting ways that I thought. Like the first vision that the Dark One shows Rand, for example, is the vision of what everybody assumes the world will be like if the Dark One takes over. And Rand tries to show him like the opposite of that, but he's not able to like be very resolute in that. And then the Dark One shows him a vision of a world that like seems okay, but isn't actually, and that's because instead of making everything all dismal and evil, the Dark One would actually just take away all of the good of the world, so that he could form the world in a way that would make it appear good, or make the people think that nothing is actively wrong, like so that the people would think that Rand won, but all of the light of the world is still not there. So you have a very one-sided world there, even though it isn't the straight up misery that people assume it'll be. And Rand's like, okay, that's actually really, really, really bad. I can't let that happen. And so Rand tries to show the Dark One's like, no, actually, I'm going to show you a world without the presence of darkness at all. And he comes to discover, this is part of what I mean about the thematic depth of the story. He comes to discover through showing this vision that a world without any darkness at all is also not a good world, because the interactions that you have with certain people without that balance of darkness, without any of that, you end up with just nothing. Like, what is the point of anything if nothing is challenging, if nothing is hard, if there's nothing bad, right? And so Rand, it's not as effective when I try to explain it here, but it's that idea that utopia is actually impossible, and people who try to seek utopia are almost all evildoers, because, they are all evildoers, because utopias are never utopian. Utopias are exclusively dystopian, because part of what makes life is that there's good and bad, and there's agency, and if you don't actually have that choice, nothing actually matters, and without anything mattering, there's no meaning, and without meaning, obviously, it's kind of a circular argument, but with no meaning, what's the point? And Rand is actually confronted with this, because this is what he's been trying to do this entire time, is find a way to kill the Dark One straight up, so there is no darkness, so that the world can be perfect. And he's finally confronted in these moments with like, I'm wrong. My hopes for the future of just killing the Dark One and there being zero darkness are impossible. This cannot work. And so like he and the Dark One are combating in this very metaphysical sense. And Rand's able to come out on top, actually. He is eventually able to come out on top in a way that was really satisfying, and which worked by Rand basically deciding, there's not going to be a world where there is no darkness, because that's not good. I can't actually do that to these people. That would be just as bad as if I let the Dark One win. So when Rand has a moment to straight up kill the Dark One, basically, as close to killing the Dark One as you can possibly get, he, in the very last second, finally clicks and decides, no, I can't do that. I'm just going to reseal him. And the way that goes about was also a really cool moment, because Rand is able to like come back into the real world against Moradin, where they're still, in this frozen duel, and then they come out of it, and Rand's like, well, you can't actually really defeat me, Moradin, and Moradin's just like, I don't have to defeat you this way, and he throws a knife at Alana to try to kill her, and it hits Alana, which is really not great, but Alana actually is able to release the bond on Rand soon enough that it doesn't actually affect Rand. So that was a miracle. Thank you, Alana, for that. But that was a very tense moment. And then Rand duels Moradin again with Kalendor by basically allowing Moradin to take control of Kalendor and to channel with it with the true power, but because Rand and Nynaeve and Moraine are still linked, there's a sequence where they like all come together basically, and Rand is able to use Saidar and Saidin simultaneously basically with Kalendor, and Moradin also being involved with the true power. Rand is able to like basically, this is my best understanding of it. I probably don't have the mechanics right. I'm probably explaining it very bad anyway. I don't really care. The point is that Rand is able to like combine all three of these forms of the power, the true power, or yeah, whatever you want to call it, the true power, and Saidar and Saidin all at once to form a new seal against the Dark One, and he's able to shut down the Dark One, close off him entirely, and form a new seal for his prison, because it is in these moments while Saidar and Saidin and the true power are all interacting together. This is when the light basically bursts forth from the cave and is so bright and deals in Shayol Ghul to such a degree that you can see it all the way down in the fields of Merrilor. This is the moment when Logain witnesses the light, and it's just like, oh, this is the moment that Egwene was talking about. And he actually, Logain was actually debating on just kind of giving up, because he had like a whole like internal monologue of stuff that was up with him. Just he had some difficulties making some decisions personally, but after saving a group of innocent people was able to like figure out that there is glory in doing good actually. So that was something that was impactful for him and occurred right before the light showed up, and you know, encountering this light, just like, oh, this is the moment to break the seals. He goes ahead and breaks the seals, and you know, in the aftermath of that is when Rand is able to use this power to form a new seal against the Dark One's prison and close him off. And like, it worked. It was a really satisfying moment. I'm sure I explained all of that just incredibly poorly, but it was cool. You know, just those last nearly 300 pages dealing with the battle on all fronts and following along with it. Incredible. Like, genuinely, really incredible. Being somebody who loves climaxes and resolutions, this entire book being a climax, like pretty much all 900 pages of it just being the climax of the entire series, meant that it was inherently written for me, basically. And the fact that Sanderson was able to write it kind of worked out, because I don't know how it would have worked with Jordan, because that's another thing too that I like haven't even pointed out is over the course of the series, there have been very many moments where I've just not loved Robert Jordan's climaxes. When I do, they're really good, like Do Might Wells, incredible. The end of A Memory of Light and The Dragon Reborn, both incredible. But a lot of the climaxes are not my thing. They're too rushed. Don't really focus on the things that I want them to for the most part. This is one of the reasons why I think that Winter's Heart's ending is very overrated, is because I didn't like what happened in the climax of Rand's resolution. I just didn't find it effective. And I thought that like the entirety of this book as a climax was doing, especially with regards to Rand in, you know, the Pits of Doom against the Dark One, it felt very much of that more offhand nature that like Winter's Heart was trying to do, but actually managed to do it in a way that was effective, largely because it was thematically poignant, as well as, you know, the actual moments themselves being interesting. Whereas something like Winter's Heart, none of it actually meant anything. It didn't really matter, even though it should have mattered, because it was like arguably the biggest moment of the series up to that point. The biggest moment of the series up to the last book, arguably, even. Like, it was such a big moment, and it just didn't feel like it actually mattered because of the way that it was handled. I thought that what this book did was trying to be reminiscent of the ending of Winter's Heart, but actually managed to do it in a way that worked. I don't know if that's a comparison that anybody else has ever made is between climaxes of the series before, but like that's just the vibe that I got, was that it felt like it was trying to do that sort of offhand thing, but actually did it in a way that mattered and was relevant and poignant. And so I enjoyed it. I don't know why it is, but that's how I ended up reacting to the end. The epilogue was also surprisingly good. You have moments where like Perrin has a solid resolution, because his character, the way that he's able to grow and the way that he's able to combat himself over the last couple of books and utilize what he's learned to overcome challenges, and also the fact that he's able to overcome his desire to go search for Zareen when nobody has heard from her, because obviously she had to give the horn to Ulver, trying to get it to Matt, and then we don't hear from her again. So Perrin's like, she probably died, and he's in grief about that, but like he can't go try to find her because he needs to help Rand, because that's his purpose in all of this. So he's able to overcome that and do what he needs to do before he goes to try to find Zareen. But then he is able to find Zareen after the fact, and is also has the power and the ability, the knowledge to be able to save her, which, you know, compared to, say, his family, for example, again, pretty thematically relevant for his character. He's able to actually come to a close there. Matt, we obviously discussed having the ending for his character combating Padden Fane. That was very satisfying. He also, you know, he's still alive, and he's with the Shan-Chan now. He's going to be with the Shan-Chan with Tuon, and there's a lot of stuff there that was pretty interesting. And then in the aftermath of the fight, Rand and Moradin both actually make it out of the cave. Moradin shouldn't have, but I think the implication is that Rand carried Moradin's body out of the cave. I think out of the Pits of Doom. And so they were both able to be basically saved. And you have... I'm not entirely sure what all of the mechanics of this were. I probably don't understand it properly, but basically you have a bunch of people who are suspicious of Aviendha and Min and Elaine, because none of them seem to be too super upset at Rand dying, because Rand also dies, but they don't seem to be very upset about it. So people are just like, what's going on? Like, you guys know something that nobody else does, but they're not confiding about what's going on there. And then you also have that viewing that we remember earlier that Min had of Olivia, helping Rand to pass, or helping Rand to die, or something like that. There's something that happens that allows for Rand's consciousness basically to revitalize itself in Moradin's body, and Rand's dead body becomes Moradin's dead body. So like Moradin is dead in Rand's form, but Rand now is able to, like, he survives and lives and wakes up in Moradin's form. I'm not 100% sure what actually happened to allow that all to exist, but the fact that this happened, given the connections that we've had between Rand and Moradin in the past, Moradin wanting to seek oblivion, and Rand wanting to now live a life where he can be not the chosen one, basically. Something happens where they're able to switch form. Obviously, something that Olivia knows how to do is able to allow for Rand's consciousness, like I said, to revitalize itself in Moradin's body instead of his own. So Rand has a proper send-off and a burial, where his body is burned, even though it's technically now Moradin, and Rand wakes up in Moradin's body and sneaks out of the camp with help of some other people. And Cadsuane even notices this, and she is able to put two and two together to be like, that's Rand over there, this funeral's a sham, so I'm going to go deal with something else. She tries to walk away, and she is basically confronted by all the Aes Sedai telling her that she's going to be the new Amyrlin now that Egwene's dead, so that's also cool. Cadsuane's going to be the new Amyrlin in the aftermath of everything. And Rand gets to leave. Yeah, like, he also, while he's leaving, has a consideration, ponders about Min and Aviendha and Elaine, and like what they're all going to do, and if any of them will eventually come for him at some point. If any or all of them, you know, might come for him and try to live a life or something like that. But for now, he's going to just, you know, adventure and explore the world and actually get to see the world in a way that isn't being the Dragon Reborn trying to take over everything for the purpose of defeating the Dark One. So Rand gets to have his little happy ending, sort of, by winning the day and also not being inherently connected to what the Dragon Reborn was. And furthermore, he has no ability to channel anymore, which is interesting, but he does have the ability to, like, do things. Like, he has like a pipe and tobacco, for example, and he doesn't have the ability to channel to light the pipe, but he's able to think of the pipe being lit and it becomes lit, kind of like things happen in the Tel'aran'rhiod. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but Rand obviously still has some sort of power despite not having the ability to access magic. which is also something that is very relieving to him. And that's basically the way the book ends. That's the way the series ends. I'm sure there's a whole ton that I explained poorly in this video, and I'm sure there's a lot that I missed, but like, this video is long enough, and I just kind of rambled through my impressions of the last battle and some of the major moments and some of the things that I like and appreciated about it. You know, it was really good. I really enjoyed this book a lot, and as a result of the last 300 pages specifically, I'm not 100% sure at this point how I'm going to actually rank the series, and even how I'm going to do a particular tier list anymore, because over the course of the next month, I'm still going to be doing some Wheel of Time videos on Thursdays for various different reasons, like a full series review that I'm going to do. I'm going to do a tier list of the series, and I'll probably do a video where I kind of go over like the internet's ranking of the series. And I'm probably going to do a bunch of polls on like Reddit and some other places to try to come up with some general quote-unquote consensus of how the internet feels about the series, and kind of relate that to some topics of the series I've talked about. I'll obviously do a review of this book directly. I will also be doing another diary next week to cover these last 3 books, to cover the Brandon Sanderson arc. I also plan to do another diary for some other stuff related to the series that I'll do next month. But so like, I'm not done with Wheel of Time content, but one of the things that I will do at some point will be like a tier list of the series, and I have my 5 different categories for where I'm going to place books in and named, and one of them is relevant as like the 3 favorites, and this book is kind of making that 3 favorites rank actually a little bit difficult to determine, like what's actually going to be in there and what's not now, because it's only going to be 3. I'm not going to put 4 favorites, I'm going to put 3. So if you already know what my 3 favorite books of the series are up to this point, and then the context of this book being the one that's going to make that a little bit more of a question, we'll see what happens. But in either case, that's the Wheel of Time. Like I said, I'm not quite done covering the series on the channel. There are plenty of different videos that I could make about the series in the future, and I'm not even done with the Wheel of Time diaries yet. I have 2 more diaries left to go at this point, but I'm at the end of the series proper, like 3 years. It's been 3 years that I've been reading this series. May 2023 was when I read Eye of the World, and at this point, it is, it's still early April when I finished the book, even though I thought it would be pretty close to late April when I actually finished. So not quite right up at that 3-year mark, but really scratching at that 3-year mark that I've been spending with the series. And it's been a journey. The vast majority of the time that I've been doing BookTube has been spent in some capacity with the Wheel of Time. It's so weird to me. Don't mind me, I'm just heading over to my Goodreads real quick here at the end of the video. I'm looking at The Eye of the World. I'm going to look at my activity on it to see what day I started actually reading the book, just for fits and giggles. It was April 28th, 2023 that I started reading The Eye of the World. That's actually right around the time that I would have expected to finish this book if I was only reading it on weekends. Like if I still had my full-time job from 9 months ago or whenever, if I'd still been working that all the way up through now and I was only reading on weekends, it would probably be around that time when I finished this book. But I mean, there's a little bit more stuff that I'm going to be doing for the series. That means that I won't be like done with the series here until somewhere closer to then. It doesn't really matter. The point is, it's been 3 years. 3 years. 3 years out of less than 4.5 years doing BookTube. 3 years of that has been spent in some capacity with Wheel of Time. Just wow. I mean, it's surreal. I know I'm just rambling at this point, and the end of this video is kind of nonsense, and I should probably cut all of this. Probably not going to, because it's weird to accept that I'm done, that this is the last one of my diaries for one of the books. It's just weird, because The Wheel of Time is one of those series that I kind of always knew that I wanted to read from the moment seeing the covers in my high school library at the time, like as a freshman even, just seeing the mass markets there on the shelf, seeing that many books and seeing them all being pretty big, there was just this morbid curiosity thing that I had way back then. It's just like, I kind of want to read those books. And when I like rediscovered the series, through, getting into BookTube in late 2021, or mid 2021 is probably slightly more appropriate. Maybe early, I don't remember, but it was like getting into BookTube sphere where I started seeing like fantasy related stuff, right? And, started seeing coverage of Eye of the World. And that's when I realized, not Eye of the World specifically, but just the Wheel of Time in general, and saw some of the covers. It's just like, wait a minute, those are the covers of that series that I saw back in high school. I wanted to read those. And so it became pretty much right then and there a bucket list item again. Like, I'm going to read this series and I'm going to read it all the way through. And a year and a half after starting BookTube, I started it. 3 years after that, I have finally finished. What a chapter of my life. There's been a lot of different parts of my life that this series has encompassed that has been really, really interesting. And, something that I not addressed in any of these diaries, just ways in which the series has actually connected with me in surprising ways. Ways that it has inspired me in certain ways that it has definitely inspired me, if that makes any sense, meaning like there were things that the series was doing in some ways that was like, well, I know what I'm not doing when I do my own writing, right? So there is, both positive and negative inspiration that came from the series at different times. Also the characters that I've connected to at one point or another. In fact, this is something that I've actually not even mentioned up to this point. One of my favorite characters in this arc of the series, the last 3 books, just the Brandon Sanderson portion of it, was Gawain, and I'm not entirely sure why. Well, actually, I have several ideas why. I'm just not going to explain why, but there are some ways in which I felt a strange sort of kinship to Gawain over these last few books that also allowed for these last few books to connect with me in an interesting way that a lot of the books in the series haven't. Just a lot of things about the Wheel of Time that have been surprising, and, despite my issues and despite the amount that I've complained about different things over the years, and over the years being accurate is kind of strange. The amount of complaining that I do at times, the amount of ranting that I do at times, and the amount of negative feedback that I provide at times, and the amount of annoyance that I get from some people with regard to the series and the way that certain discussions about it happen. The thing that defines the Wheel of Time for me is that, like, it is both better than people say and it is worse than people say. Like, it is a situation where, I really enjoyed my time with this, and I think it was meaningful, and I found it to be worth it. But I also find the people who hate the series to be just annoying about it, so that kind of bothers me. It's weird to be in a situation with any form of series where, like, you are actively in its defense a lot, but you are also actively disparaging it a lot as well, and that's been a really weird and interesting position to be in throughout the series. But I appreciate all the people who've joined me for my journey, just followed along through the whole thing, because there are a handful of people I know who have been along for literally the entire ride, and I don't know how to express my appreciation for that. I really don't, because I've had my times where I've been annoying about this series for sure, both in a positive way and in a negative way, and it's just been a journey. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here. I still have plenty more rambling that I'm gonna be doing about the series over especially the next month and a half. So like I said, I'm not done just making content for the series, but this video, there's still a lot more to come, still a lot more coverage for it, and a lot more annoyance that I'm going to be to people about it. But I am going to spend a lot more time actually working on some content for the series. There's a little bit more reading that I'm going to be doing with relation to the series as well, that you'll get to see in a special video next month that I'm excited for. But for now, I'm just going to relish in the fact that I am now done with this series, and this obligation is obligation. Let's not phrase it as an obligation, but the fact that this is no longer on my plate. Over 3 years later, I no longer have to schedule any of my TBR around the Wheel of Time, because that's been like the primary thing that I've scheduled most of my TBR around for 3 years, has been which months I would and wouldn't be reading a Wheel of Time book. This year in particular, just reading the last 3 back-to-back in February, March, and April. Just last year, reading like 5 of the books in 1 year and doing it like every other month for the most part. Like there's a lot about my reading schedule that has been halfway inherently determined by the Wheel of Time, and now the Wheel of Time isn't going to be affecting my actual TBR schedule going forward. And that's almost more weird than the fact that I'm done with the series, is the fact that I don't have to work around it for my other reading. That is so strange. But anyway, yeah, sorry. This video is probably awful. I'm so sorry about it, but that's the end of the Wheel of Time Diaries for the regular season, I guess. I have 2 more episodes to come out that I have planned, so we'll end off the series with 75 total episodes, which is also itself crazy. But for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC. I hope this video wasn't dreadful for you, and I hope to see you guys in the next one, and hope that you have the patience for even more Wheel of Time on the channel. I'm so sorry to the people who don't watch this series.